that in 1998, we did the first ever audit of the patent systems of the United States, of Canada, of Australia, of the European Union, and elsewhere. And what we found quite tragically is that an enormous number of crimes were being committed using the patent system to, in fact, stand in the way of progress, not to advance the innovation and useful arts for which they were established. And specifically in 1999, we uncovered what became the roots of our awareness of the current pandemic that we've been exposed to. In 1999, we uncovered the biological and chemical weapons patents that were proliferating around the country and around the world. And in 1999, going into 2000, we first reported on the weaponization of biologic materials in violation of biological and chemical weapons treaties. And among those weaponizations was in our first published report for a number of intelligence and law enforcement community, our identification of the chimeric alteration and recombinant technologies around coronavirus, which in 1999 were first developed to serve as a means by which we could build a vaccine vector at the time thought to be useful for the treatment or prevention of HIV. The problem with that work was it very specifically, beginning in 1999 with NIAID's funding directed by Anthony Fauci, it was very clear that what they had done in their gain-of-function research in 1999 was take what was a normally occurring pathogen and turn it into what was then referred to as an infectious, non-transmissible pathogen. In other words, they actually made it more dangerous to the human, and they made it more dangerous so that it could be used as a potential for vaccine vectors going forward. And that was in 1999. In 2002, the weaponization of coronavirus was complete. And you heard what I said, 2002. That's when the spike protein, that's when the ACE receptor dynamics, that's when the open reading frames around various subfractions of the protein synthesis that's available using the model created by the coronavirus model. All of that was fully weaponized by 2002. And I make that point very clearly because we did not have SARS as a human condition until we had invented a weaponized version of coronavirus. A decade earlier, Pfizer had filed the first patent on a coronavirus vaccine that was a veterinary application, and that was filed in 1990. So Pfizer's first effort to get a spike protein-based vaccine for coronavirus started in 1990, not in 2020. This has been, to restate the obvious, a pathogen bioweapons program that is now over 2 years or 2 decades in the making. And it is vital for us to understand that what is currently being called the medical countermeasure, referred to as a vaccine, does not meet statutory definition of that particular technology, because unlike every other vaccine in the history of humanity, every other vaccine is derived from some either fragment of or attenuated version of a pathogen. This particular injection that we're dealing with right now, this particular injection is an mRNA model, computer generated, not derived from a living or an organic material. This is a computer simulation of an mRNA strand, which was thought to be a means by which we could turn the human body into a pathogen creator. By that I mean the formation of the coronavirus associated spike protein. And for the first time in vaccine history, and once again, I'm using that term because it's what we're calling it, and it is not, in fact, a vaccine. It's a gene therapy to create a bioweapon. But for the first time in vaccine history, we are relying on the immune system to respond to a pathogen creation that we first inject into people. So the fact of the matter is we have an unprecedented outcome. And if we go back and look at the patent record, if we go back and look at the laboratory record, and if we go back and look at the funding record, we see that the current pathogen called SARS-CoV-2 was clearly chimerically altered and was clearly chimerically developed in the laboratory so that it could be used both as a weapon and as a medical countermeasure in 2015. University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and we've reported on this quite significantly, funded by NIAID, developed and violated the International Convention on Biological and Chemical Weapons by taking a foreign uploaded model of SARS-CoV-2 and turning it into a recombinant chimeric pathogen, which they said, and I quote, was poised for human emergence. And poised for human emergence, not in 2019, as we've been told by the propaganda, but that publication was published in February of 2016, published from work that was done from 2013 to 2015. There is no novel coronavirus. There is a weaponized version of a computer simulation of a fragment that is in fact modeled to be the spike protein analogous to what we've been told is the spike protein associated with SARS-CoV-2. The problem is we do not have anything that is actually derived from an actual pathogen, and we do not have anything that's actually responsive to the immune system that was in fact responsive to a pathogen. This is a computer simulation meant to harm and destroy what we called humanity.
You know, David, just listening to you, I mean, nothing that you said is new, and yet to hear it again still shocks me that we are at this place, at this time, globally, killing humanity.
Yes. And according to Pfizer, we have what they refer to in their own documents as an acceptable death rate. I don't know how many of you can sit with that statement, but the notion that there is something called an acceptable death rate is something I find morally repugnant. But I find more interesting than that Canada's role in this, which has achieved almost no fundamental coverage in any media or even in the counterculture media. And most Canadians don't realize that Canada itself, and not just Canada, but specifically the University of British Columbia, beginning in 2005, realized that if it was going to be relevant in the biotech space, it had to be the country and it had to be the research hotbed for establishing the delivery mechanism whereby mRNA vaccines could be developed. The University of British Columbia, working in partnership with Inex Pharmaceuticals in 2005, developed the lipid nanoparticle technology that ultimately became the basis of the formation of a company in British Columbia called Tecmira Pharmaceuticals. In 2009, Tecmira had a very interesting set of challenges, and this was commensurate with the 2008 declaration by the World Health Organization that the coronavirus was in fact eradicated as a condition associated with SARS. And because of the lack of funding in 2008, both Canada and the United States struggled with the fact that they had developed a technology that was supposed to be for a vaccination of coronavirus and for a number of other viral models. But the problem was they ran out of funding. And so there was a series of reorganizations. And in those reorganizations, two companies were formed, Arbutus Pharmaceuticals and Acuitas Pharmaceuticals. Acuitas is the one that unfortunately the government of Canada has not told the citizens of Canada is the reason why both Moderna and Pfizer have the ability to deliver the current bioweapons program. And I think most people would be shocked to find out that when you have the Prime Minister of Canada getting up in front of a camera in the spring of 2020, telling the world that the only way forward is to allegedly return to a new normal when there is a vaccine. What Trudeau did not tell the public was that he had a financial stake in the outcome of that being the selected pathway forward. What he didn't tell the Canadian public was that Canada's blight on the moral record of what has been historically an amazingly wonderful set of innovations coming out of the Canadian research institutions and research laboratories, in fact, created the mechanism whereby you could take mRNA and inject it into a population and try to stabilize that injection. The lipid nanoparticle technology that was developed and ultimately passed to Arbutus was the subject of a licensing agreement that was made with Acuitas Pharmaceuticals in British Columbia, a private company who conveniently had very little reporting requirements. And Acuitas misappropriated the lipid nanoparticle technology and ultimately made it available to both BioNTech and Moderna. It is absolutely critical for us to understand that without the Canadian contribution of the lipid nanoparticle technology from British Columbia, we would have no meaningful response in the form of what's being called a vaccination, and we would not have a bioweapons program. That's a pretty important statement to make to an audience largely of Canadians. And it would be very interesting to find out why it is that Trudeau has not admitted to the public and has been unwilling to actually put into the public record what we know to be at least billions of dollars of concessions. And it could be, I mean, if we look at just Pfizer BioNTech's own situation, we know that in the case of Pfizer BioNTech, that last quarter alone, somewhere between $8 and $9 billion came in the form of the revenue off of all of the interventions that are being sold off as coronavirus vaccines. But somewhere in 2016, somebody knew that there was a lottery win to be had. And my guess is that somewhere inside of the Canadian health system and somewhere inside NIAID and the Vaccine Research Center and somewhere inside the UNC Chapel Hill records, we will find that the Trudeau government was fully aware by at least 2018 that we were going to have a significant pandemic requiring this core technology to be unleashed on the world, courtesy of the Canadian collaboration on lipid nanoparticles. And there is no question that by the time we get to 2019, March specifically of 2019, we know that Arbutus, Moderna, Pfizer, BioNTech, and others were in fact working on a vaccine for a respiratory pathogen. And we know that information because they amended their patent filings to say exactly that.
So let me just unpack this a little bit, David. You're revealing evidence here that this technology has been in the works in Canadian University of British Columbia, supported by Government of Canada for a number of years now.
Yep.
It was clear that there was a gold mine to be had here because there was a fight over it.
Yep.
And when Trudeau announced in 2020 that we needed a vaccine to get back to normal, he didn't say, listen, we're part of the solution here. We've developed technology that's going to save the world. He didn't talk about how great Canadian technology is. And I know you don't like to speculate, but why would he not celebrate and announce that to the world?
Well, I think it's very clear that he has, for a significant period of time, become extremely compromised in the fact that he pretends on the one hand to be a victim of a public health crisis. And on the other hand, not unlike the governor of New York, the spokesperson for the alleged level-headed response of draconian lockdown and countermeasure approaches, which create the market demand that says that we're going to remove civil liberties, we're going to remove the right for people to actually engage in any civil discourse. But in fact, what we're going to do is pretend like we are somehow the victims of a natural set of events that have unfolded. The fact of the matter is he knows very good and well, because he was party to, and the government certainly was party to, agreements with Pfizer, with Moderna, and with others, where there was no question that Canadian firms knew good and well that the lipid nanoparticle technology was actually a frontline contender for a respiratory pathogen simulation. And by no later than September of 2019, the Canadian government was fully aware and participating in what was supposed to be a global exercise to test the readiness of the world to deal with a respiratory pathogen pandemic that was planned and published in September of 2019. And the Canadian government was very much a party of that. So there's no chance that this was not fully known, fully anticipated, fully premeditated. And there is no question that the script that Trudeau read from was a script that was in fact marketing what would become a federal restraint of trade violation in Canada, which was a very important restraint of trade. By making the allegation before we even knew what the actual pathogen was technically, what we know is that Trudeau's statements biased the marketplace against the consumer, so that there was in fact declared by the government a single pathway, a single market opportunity out of this particular pandemic. And by telling the world that the only way forward was a vaccine, what that did was it actually precluded the use of life-saving countermeasures that were medicines that could have helped and could have supported the health of people. And instead of that, we watched people die while we were waiting for an economic windfall. And that economic windfall is going to a private corporation whose accountability is not to a shareholder, is not to anything that has public visibility. It has the private benefit of being a private British Columbia company that can be used as a front for all manner of things. And it is in fact, without question, participating in one of the greatest crimes in terms of racketeering and collusion that this world has ever seen.
Well, David, that was the question in my head. What kind of crimes are these? I mean, this is treason, amongst other things. This is criminal. This is homicide.
Yeah, and it's important for us to really focus in on this, because most people have heard me talk about the racketeering and antitrust laws that are violated. And both the US and Canada have very robust antitrust laws. The fact of the matter is there's three fundamental elements of antitrust, and all three are violated. The first is that you cannot do what's called market allocation. In other words, you cannot use either a public or a private institution where colluding parties get together and say, we are going to tell the consumer what their only option is. That's a market allocation violation of a racketeering thing. You also cannot suppress information and coerce people into accepting a single scenario when the market forces are not at play. In other words, you cannot suspend from market consideration other alternatives so that you pick the only winner, in which, by the way, you've already placed bets on the table right. in the form of funding, and you also have an economic gain. And you can guarantee yourself that the Canadian government knows very good and well that it had huge economic gain to gain from the use of the lipid nanoparticle technology, and it had everything to lose if the lipid nanoparticle technology didn't win. So we know that the collusion was there. We know that the racketeering was there. We also know that there was insider information, non-transparent transactions from what's called interlocking directorates, where individuals who have the ability to set prices, to allocate research dollars, and to ultimately set acquisition policy to take that technology on board is in fact, by very definition, the racketeering that is anti-competitive antitrust. Now, why is this important? It's important because these are all felony violations. And what makes a felony violation far more important than a civil crime is that a felony violation actually pierces the veil of corporate liability. And this is a very important point people need to understand. The reason why I'm so obsessed with going after felonies and not going after civil cases is because the felony violation of antitrust laws, which is prima facie established in this pandemic, would in fact mean that the manufacturers would not have the protections provided here in the United States under the 1986 Act, under the PrEP Act, and in Canada under those acts equivalents. In other words, no corporation gets civil liability immunity if they are complicit in a felony crime. And once we establish that that is in fact the case, which by the way, does not require legal expertise. This is a prima facie case, meaning the facts present themselves. There is no question that this was an act of racketeering and collusion. There is no question that this is an act of willful manipulation of market forces in violation of statutes both sides of the border. And the fact of the matter is, the minute this becomes felony violation, all of the liability flows back. Civil and criminal liability flows back to the manufacturers. And I can guarantee you that the day Pfizer and Moderna have to be on the hook for the lives they're harming and the lives that they're taking, there is no question that the entire terror campaign would shut down the next day.
The problem is we have no accountability right now.
Well, you actually do. You've got an election coming up sooner than we do. And the fact of the matter is, this is a moment where Canadians need to understand that we've been duped as a community. And by the way, that's not unique to Canada. The civil society of the world has been duped to believe that we should be arguing about face masks and social distancing and whether businesses should stay open or not. We have been duped into having a conversation that is the wrong conversation. There is a crime that is being committed. Our public officials are complicit in that crime. And there is no question that as a civilization, we owe it to ourselves and future generations to make sure that we are not silent while those who are in positions of elected authority are committing willful acts of crimes against humanity.
With this information, should there not be a criminal investigation starting this minute?
There absolutely should be. Here in the United States, we have the unfortunate reality of not having the benefits of some of what you guys have in Crown law. But the fact of the matter is, in Canada, as well as the rest of the Commonwealth, you actually have a mechanism where you can allege and actually initiate criminal proceedings without relying on the Justice Department we have in the US. We know that our DOJ here in the United States is entirely corrupt. We know that they have been willfully incapable of prosecuting any of the known crimes, which, by the way, include here in the United States, one of the best known crimes that apparently we can now get away with, which is lying to Congress. As most of you know, Anthony Fauci has now on 2 documented occasions actually lied to Congress.